And GOP senators increasingly confident that they have the votes to block new witnesses from testifying in the trial. Let's hear from the other side now. Democratic Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania joins us. Senator, good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
So are you concerned what you're hearing from GOP, members of the GOP, that they may have the votes to block witnesses?
Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow, but that's going to be a determination that Republican senators have to make. I would hope that to have a full and fair trial, that they would be voting affirmatively for relevant witnesses and relevant documents. I think the trial could proceed from there. I think it would be the right approach for the Senate to take, but they have to make that decision. But I think it would be a mistake if they vote the other way. And I think it would indicate to me, at least, if they vote against having witnesses that are relevant in documents, that the president is dictating the trial, not the Senate.
So explain to us why, because we heard from the White House saying that it's not that they're blocking witnesses. This already happened in the House. There were 17 witnesses, Hogan Gidley pointed out the White House earlier. You just heard from Rick Scott. He said this should have happened in the House. It was their job to get this done. They chose not to because of the timing of all of it. To all of that, you say what?
I just don't agree, because the fundamental difference here between the House and the Senate is the difference really between a grand jury and a trial. No one would say that in a courtroom in America you couldn't have witnesses because witnesses weren't called in a particular grand jury proceeding. Look, this is a trial, and the determination we have to make is a grave matter. It's a determination about whether or not a president should be removed if the charges are true that he solicited the interference of a foreign government and also demanded from that foreign government that they announce an investigation of a political opponent and a debunked theory about the last election. So these are grave charges and a serious determination we have to make. The best way to get to that is put people under oath. I don't know why Republicans seem to be afraid of having people put their hand in the air, testify under oath, and then be cross-examined. The president's lawyers could have as much time as they need to cross-examine John Bolton or any other witness. But what are they afraid of? They don't seem to want to put anyone under oath who's making the case for the president.
So you're clearly making the case that you do not want this trial to end without seeing additional witnesses. Right. Chris Van Hollen is taking it a step further, and he is making the case that he wants to force a vote tomorrow to require the Chief Justice to subpoena impeachment witnesses that he sees relevant and necessary to call up in the trial. He says this: my motion ensures the justice will serve the same role as a judge in any trial across our country to allow the Senate access to the facts they need to get the truth. No Republican can question the fairness of this approach. The Chief Justice oversees the highest court in the land, and given his authority to rule on questions of privilege, they should not fear a drawn-out process. Do you support that call?
I do. Look, I think it was rather bizarre that Republican senators initially, and I hope they changed their mind, voted against having Chief Justice John Roberts make relevancy determinations. The president can't make that determination. I think people would question one side or the other making it in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Why not have the Chief Justice determine relevance, and then he could also preside over the determination of how you deal with testimony. If someone says, okay, we've subpoenaed John Bolton, he's testifying. In the course of testifying, he answers a question or is about to answer a question about something which might have a privilege implicated or an assertion of confidentiality. The Chief Justice could pull that question out and say, let's set that aside, keep going, ask the next question. In other words, there are ways to manage the presentation of this evidence so that we get a fair trial.
Obviously, your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are doubting whether or not that would ever actually happen. I will finish with this quick soundbite from Senator Perdue. He joined us on this program earlier, and get your quick response.
We can't go outside the scope of what we've been given. Our charge in the Senate is to rule on the articles that have been brought to us. These two articles, as we've heard over and over this week after 8 scintillating days here, is that the articles are not impeachable. And more than that, the House managers have not proven their case.
So he is arguing it is not the Senate's job in all of this to expand the impeachment probe in this Senate trial. Final thoughts, Senator.
Well, first, I think there's a substantial record, a compelling and substantial record developed by the House. with all those witnesses that testified. I think that Mr. Bolton, though, now that we know more about what his testimony could be, would provide very relevant information. We should hear from him. We should also hear from Mr. Mulvaney. I think if that happened, I think most Americans would have said this was a full and fair trial. Senators can deliberate and then make a determination.
Well, Senator, John, some interviews were dug up of John Bolton talking about that phone call, which we've been playing on this program today. I'll just paraphrase it for you. He talked about very warm and cordial phone calls in an August 2019 interview. We're hoping to be able to meet in Warsaw, have a few minutes together. John Bolton, the president, tweeted out after that was dug up and said, game over. Final word.
I'm just saying, put him under oath,
okay,
and allow him to be examined and cross-examined. That's the best way to arrive at the truth. If something exculpatory that is in favor of the president comes out, that's the way it would happen. But let's put people under oath.
Senator, thank you.
Thanks.